Welcome to Administering Identity Part 2. In this part of the session, we'll continue our journey into Entra ID and look into creating and configuring identities and manage them using groups. We're looking at managing users in Entra environments. All users must have an account. Now, these accounts can be created in different ways, depending on what the use or need for this account is. For users that are part of your organization, we typically look at creating what we refer as member accounts. For anyone that you collaborated with outside of your organization, they might require a guest or an external account. Now, those accounts are typically created as part of an invitation. Let's have a look at some of these details. We're back to the Entra portal, and within the Entra environment, as we go and manage our users, let's go and click onto Users under the Manage heading. Now, under the tab for Users, we can look at my existing user settings, and I can see the number of users I currently have, and these are all my demo users that I currently have in my environment. Now, for me to create a new user account, all I can do is click on New User and choose one of the options. Like mentioned, if you're looking at an internal user account for a user that's a colleague or part of your organization, you're looking to create a member account. And for that, we'll create a new user account. Let's explore some of this first. As we start creating a user account, you can see there are 4 mandatory fields that we need to complete in the very first basic tab. The first field that we are looking at is referred as user principal name. And this is what makes the user account name unique in your environment. Now, let's start creating a user account. Let's call this Alice and give a surname called Jones. So let's create an account for Alice Jones. This is our superstar admin that's trying to help us work with some of the details. Now, as part of this setup, as you can see, currently it's going on to the domain name that I have registered in my environment, and is registering this account on that name at the moment. Now, if I wanted to bring in certain other details like my domain name.com or any other sites that I have registered, I might want to do that as bringing in custom domains to the setup, which we'll look at in the next module. Now, apart from that, if I look at some of the other details that are mandatory, I have the mail nickname that's already available here for me to pick from. This detail is already grayed out and completed as it's deriving this information from my user principal name. Now, if I don't want to do that, I can uncheck this box that suggests derive this from the user principal name, and I can change that. Now, you might want to do this if in your organization you require people to use different names to their email address. For example, someone might need to shorten their name from Alexandra to Alex or something similar. However, if they prefer multiple or if they have a double-barrel name and they only want to use one part of it, something that you can think of in considering changing their mail nickname. However, if you want to keep them exactly the same, you can leave it as it is and let the system derive that for you. If you don't, you simply uncheck that and make a change to that on the setup here. Now, their account name that appears in your setup when you're looking for this user, either typing in their email address or looking for them in different Office suites like Teams, you might look at their display name, which appears on the screen. This might be exactly the same as your user principal name. However, you will type this as you want the name to appear for them on their environment. For me, in this case, I'll add a space in between the first name and the surname. Now, the next part, which is mandatory for me to complete, is to add a password to this account to keep this account secure. Now, this current password is auto-generated. I can take this off and create my own password. Bearing in mind, once the user logs in at the very first attempt with the password that you're adding, they will be asked to reset their password. Now, the last thing that I have on the screen, which suggests this account is currently enabled. Now, typically, if your user is ready to log into this account, you might want to leave this ticked so they can start working with this account straight away after this account is created. However, if you are creating this user account as proactive activity where your user might not start for another few days, you might want to disable this account till the day they're ready to start working. This is again part of your zero trust methodology, considering you want to enable the account just in time for the users to start working with. So for now, I'll leave this on as we're going to use this account as part of this setup. Now, if I look at some of the other details, each user account has loads of different properties. And there's a long list of these properties that are available for you to look at. It's a recommendation that we complete all these properties, or as many as we can, as part of a user account setup in a real environment. A lot of these properties can be then used for other functions and features that you have available within Entra, so you can identify these users, either if you're looking to group them together based on their similar properties, or add certain rules to grant them access for different services based on these properties. These can be very, very useful in later stage with other features that we have available in your environment. Now, just for this demo, I'll keep this very simple. Let's type in the details in here, like Alice Jones. I'll type in the last name, Jones, and like we said, this is a user that's a member. Now, if I want to add certain the details, like their job title, we can start looking at creating Alice. Let's give Alice an admin role. So let's call this Alice is IT administrator, and Alice is part of Contorso, and we'll bring Alice in our IT department. Now, I'll leave certain other details blank. However, like I said, in a real scenario, you would like to configure as many possible details as you would. Things like adding who the manager is, what their hire date is, any other certain details that you might have within your environment, you want to complete them as they will become useful later on. Now, one particular setting that's right at the bottom of this screen, which is not a mandatory field for us to allocate. However, it becomes very, very important when you're creating a user account. Currently, this is, like I said, not completed. Now, this is the usage location for my user. Typically, the location where my user is based. If I don't configure this, the only problem I would have is later, if I'm looking to assign licenses to this user so they can function with different features that I might require them to work on, such as my Office 365 or different other premium licenses for my Entra, they might not be able to, we might not be able to assign this license to them. Now, for us to do this, we go into assigning a location. Let's just, for this demo, pick up a location. Let's go and choose UAE as an example. Now, the difference that this makes is different parts of the world, your licenses unlocks different features for them, or certain features aren't available in certain locations. For that reason, you must have a user location assigned to a user, so when the license is assigned to them, they can unlock some of those features and work with them. Now, if their user is missing user location, it will give you an error before you can assign a license to the user. Right, now, apart from looking at that, let's have a quick look at some of the other tabs. The next tab that we have is referring as assignments. For this point in time, let's leave the assignments alone. We'll come back and create some more details onto roles and groups at a later stage, so we'll cover them a bit later. You don't have to assign them right now. This can be added a bit later. For now, we're ready with the user. We can simply click on create, verify some of the details that we have on the screen, and hit create to create a member account. Now, this should happen pretty straightforward, shouldn't take too long, and we should be able to look at this on our list. So if I refresh this and try looking for my user account, I can see Alice Jones is available, and we can go into Alice's account and start looking at some of the details in Alice's account. Now, currently, Alice doesn't have any membership of any group, and none of the settings have been set because Alice's account is fairly new and it would probably take some time to populate any automated features, and then we can start looking at managing other details around that. Now, let's take a step back. We just about went into creating a user account for a member user, a user that's part of your organization. How do I change this to invite someone that's not within your organization? So if I want to collaborate with another user that's not part of my organization, so for example, a B2B connection with somebody else, someone that's coming to help me create a resource, or I'm collaborating with them over a project. The easiest way to do this would be going to clicking on the new user tab on the top and clicking on invite external user. Now, external users typically would be only requested to complete, or as you as an administrator, you only be requested to complete a couple of things. Things like adding their email address and simply making sure that you have a invite URL available. This is the redirect URL that will be sent to them as they receive this email. Now you are sending them an invitation. That means you can add a message to this invitation for them to understand the reason for you to invite them. This could be a nice message to tell them, welcome to your team, helping you to work in a project, so they can look at some of those details to ensure that this is coming from the right person and they can accept the invitation. Now, the accepting button that they see within their email is typically redirecting them to this link. As a security concern, if you are thinking what happens to someone that might take this link and try to register within your organization, then just to be rest assured that this link will only work for the email address that you add in here and send this invitation out to. If somebody else uses this link, it will not help them register onto your environment as a user. Now, as we can see, there are only 2 mandatory fields for an external account, or in this case, my invitation that I'm sending out. Apart from that, there are quite a few other details that we can complete, just like we did for our users or member users earlier on. Details like properties, their first name, their last name. I can go into defining what job role they have, their company details, and all sorts of other details that we might complete within their properties. Now, as a recommendation, please ensure you complete as many details as you possibly can and add them into this setup. Again, like I said, these can be very, very useful if you are looking to integrate other features within your environment. Now, apart from this, we can assign them access to different groups and assign them roles in here as well. If they are going to be working with your environment, they might need access to certain resources. Yet again, we can do this at a later stage. For now, all we can do is hit review and invite and send this invitation out to the user that you are inviting to collaborate with you in your organization. Now, apart from creating a user account, you might need to manage user accounts in different ways. For example, if I want to reset the username user's password, and we spoke about self-service password reset in the first part of this session. However, if you're looking to manage the account directly and you want to reset their password because you might not have enabled this user to be part of SSPR or self-service password reset, you can do that while you log into the user account and hit reset password over here. If there was an issue with the user account, for example, the account is compromised, you might also consider in disabling the user account. And to do that, if I look at the overview of the user and scroll down to the bottom of the screen, this is where I saw the enable user account at the part of the user creation. Now we can see the same setting over here to disable this. All I have to do is go into edit and switch this feature off by unchecking that box and saving it. This would disable their account. One more thing that you might want to consider if the user account is compromised is that you might want to revoke any sessions that are currently active for their account. This breaks any current sessions that have authenticated the user to be able to work on. Instead of just blocking their account, you will revoke their session and then block their account So any current sessions are broken and their account is disabled, so they can't re-authenticate to log into their account if this account was compromised. Now, if you're looking to delete an account, let's have a quick look at how that process looks like. Let's go into one of my accounts I have here. Let's go into Alice Smith and try deleting Alice Smith's account. Now, as I click on delete account and hit delete, this is me confirming that I want to delete this account. Now, typically this sits under my deleted users. Now, if I look at my deleted users, we should see Alice Smith available for me to pick from in here. This account stays in a deleted state for 30 days as a default setting. Now, within 30 days, I can retrieve this user back out and recover this user account if I needed to. Let's assume the user was deleted in error, or the person that we assumed and is no longer part of the setup has resumed or returned back within the 30 days. We can recover their account by simply going into restoring user. However, after 30 days, there's no way we can restore this user account. So that's something important to bear in mind. Now, once my user is created and I'm not looking to delete the user account, I might want to do certain other things. Things like assigning a license to a user so they can carry out different functions and tasks for me. Now, in the past, we would simply go into user account. Let's jump onto Alex Jones's account and have a look at this. In the past, I would simply go into my licenses under the blade for the user account and click on the license and add license details. Now, this feature is no longer available directly under Entra portal. Now, you need to go into your admin center. To land onto this link, you simply type in admin.microsoft.com and this brings you to your admin portal. This is your M365 admin portal. Now, within your M365 admin portal, you should be able to look at managing licensing. Just to confirm, we are looking at admin.microsoft.com, which is your M365 admin center portal. Now, within that, if I go back into looking at the tab, which is licenses, I can look at managing my licenses that I have in my environment. Currently, these are some of my licenses that I have available in my demo environment. So if I was to look at assigning an E5 license, which is an M365 license, equivalent to my premium P2, I can simply click on that and look at how many licenses I've got available. Currently in my setup, only 3 users have that license and I can manage that. So for example, if I wanted to take this license off one of my users, all I need to do is click on it and click on unassign. And that strips away that license from that user. However, if I need to assign a user a license, what we can do is we can simply go into, let's uncheck that user first, click on to assign license and choose a user from the list. For example, we assigned our license to Alice Jones. If I start typing in some of that detail, I'll see that information appearing up and I should be able to assign license to Alice Jones. Now, before I hit assign, have a look at some of the details over here. We have quite a few different options available under Premium P2. Now, these might be very, very useful to understand that your organization has a lot of these features available to them. However, if you are controlling access to some of these resources or features that you might not utilize or you don't want your user to have access to, you can switch them off as you are assigning them the license, even though they are available typically in the license as and when it's assigned. For example, just for this demo, let's assume I am not allowing this user to use Clipchamp. So I want to take that off. And I don't want them to be able to look at, let's pick up another service from here. Again, just at random, no particular reason. Let's take off Microsoft Loop. I don't want them to use these 2 features for whatever reason. I can simply take them off and assign them. Even though this user will be able to function at a P2 with other features within this plan, these 2 features that I've taken off, they won't be available for them to utilize. And again, this is something that we can do to manage different functions and features within your environment. Now, once I've assigned this license to this user, it's asking me if I need to send an email to tell them. Again, this is somewhere, this is a nice option to let the user, make the user aware that they have now got a new license that's assigned to them. So I am going to say next to this, and again, just confirming that this license was assigned. Might take a few minutes for it to be active, and the user might receive an email to confirm they have this license assigned to them. Now, this is how you assign a license to a user in the environment. Now, we can assign licenses to groups as well. However, we'll discuss this a bit in a few moments. Before I go into that, let's jump back into our Entra environment and go back into looking at some more details around this. Now, once we've configured our users, either this is a member user or a guest user, we might need to manage these users apart from filling in their properties. We might need to manage them by organizing them in different groups. Now, groups can be used for various reasons. Let's have a quick look and understand how these groups work. Let's click on groups from the menu. Now, currently in my, this is part of the LS's account. Let's jump back out to the main. And let's try that again from the main view. Apologies. Let's click on the groups from here. Now, as we land onto the groups directly from my Entra rather than going into Alice's account. Now, you can see at a quick overview under my groups, this is again just to verify that I am still looking at my cursor setup that we have. We are just exploring groups right now, and we're at the moment looking at overview. Now, part of this tells me that I have about 13 groups currently running. There are different types of groups that I have at the moment, and I can see some more details around them. Let's talk a little bit more about what these groups are and how they work. First of all, let's go and create a new group. Now, if I click on new group and start creating a group, the first option that I'm asked to complete is group types. Now, if I drop this menu down, I get two options given. Do I want to create a security group or a Microsoft 365 group? Now, if you are not sure on what these two groups are, or if you've forgotten about them, or if you are not so used to working with the groups and you're creating them for the very first time, you can refer to the documentation to understand the difference between them and know what they are. However, just on the portal, if you click on the small icon for information, it gives you some understanding on what these two groups can be used for and might give you a quick hint. For example, if I'm looking for M365 groups, it suggests that this is typically used when you are working with users to collaborate on different things. Things like I'm giving a set of users access to some shared resources. Either they're accessing a mailbox, they're looking at calendars, they're looking at sharing files, or I'm looking at putting them onto SharePoint sites or many other features that I have within my M365 solutions. Now, if I'm doing that, M365 group is good enough for these set of users. Now, if I am creating a group which requires slight different access to my applications or resources that I'm creating, and assign them licenses along with that, in that case, I might need to consider using a security group. Now, one more thing that's important to understand is this. For my M365 groups, I can only use users to be members of that group. However, if I compare that to my security groups, I can see that I can add users, devices, service principals, which is usually an identity for my applications, and other groups, which means group nesting is allowed within security groups. So this is, again, a very, very nice thing to understand. So if you're ever looking to manage devices, applications, or other groups, typically you're looking at managing or working with a security group. M365 groups can only allow users to be a member. Now, I'll choose a security group to start with, and let's start creating a new group in our environment. Now, what I'm going to do is give it a name over here. Let's call this IT support. I have one already. Let's call this IT support level 2. And let's call this support line 2. So this is my second line support or second line IT support role. So I'm creating a group for them, and I'll group all my second line support role into this group. Now, group description. This is, again, very important. You might need to provide details on what this group is used for. You might start adding in details over here around all the users from second line support role. Should be part of this. Cool. Now, this simply gives someone else that's managing your environment or working or collaborating with you within your Entra environment to understand what this group is used for. There could be groups that have similar names, could have vague names that might not tell what or who can be a member of this group. While others are helping you manage your Entra environment, you might need to start giving more details in the description so they understand exactly who becomes a member of that group, so they can add users to right groups appropriately. Now, if I go further down over here, you can see I have options to enable Entra roles assigned to a group. This simply gives me an option to create a group, which we're working on at the moment, and assign a role to this entire group, rather than having individual users that I'm working on and assigning each user access to a role, and then doing the same for multiple number of times in my environment. Let's assume I have 20 application administrator. Instead of assigning them that one role again and again multiple times, one way of managing this could be by me creating a group for all my application administrators in my setup, and instead of assigning them the role one by one, I assign this role to the entire group. Now, one thing that's important to understand, this feature for assigning roles currently is available, or currently it's now on a no state. However, you cannot switch this once this group gets created. If you enable this to a yes state, again, this state will stay fixed. So no matter what the state is at the point of group creation, that does not change after the group is created. So it's very important to bear in mind when you're planning to create a group to consider some of these details before you start creating the group. Now, as you've chosen your details and you've chosen either to allow or assign a role to a group or not to assign a role to a group, and you move along from there to add other details like how will a user become a member of this group, which is membership type. Now, as part of the membership type, we can choose to have users that are assigned or dynamically added to the group. Now, as I've chosen a security group, you can see I have dynamic devices also added. Just bearing in mind, this is only available because I am currently creating a security group. M365 groups does not cater for devices, so it doesn't have that option. Now, assigned, simply meaning a user or an administrator assigns users to different groups. However, if I'm looking at a dynamic group, this is where we can explore some more details on how I can set a rule. Based on that rule, users automatically become a member of that group. Now let's have a look at some of those details, and then I'll give you a demonstration on how to bring some of the users manually assigned to a group. Let's jump onto dynamic group. Now before I do that, let's go back onto assign for a minute, and you can see the options that I have in the bottom are to assign an owner of the group and simply add a member to the group. Now, an owner typically is someone that is going to manage that group for me. Typically, you'll have administrators that are managing your environment in Entra to create groups. However, if you want to pass that management to someone else, to assign them ability just to manage a particular group so they can look at who is currently active or not part of that group, you can create a group owner that is only responsible for that particular group. However, I'll leave this option blank for now. Now for the member type, this is where I can go and add members manually. So if I can consider looking at adding users like Adele, again, like I said before, this is a security group, so I can look at applications, users, other groups and devices as a part of this setup. So I can bring in all of those options as this group or make them a member of this group. Whereas if this was an M365 group, I'll only be able to look at adding users. Now, let's assume this is where I want to add just a few users to this group, and we'll bring in Alex Dan, and we'll bring in Adele Vance to be part of my setup, and I can simply select them and they can be member of that group. Now, this is how you typically look at assigning groups or assign user or membership type to a group. Now, I don't have to do this at this stage. I can do this a bit later on. I can just simply create the group for now and get back into the group later and add members or remove members from it. So this management can be done a bit later on. Let's have a look at the dynamic queries. Now, as you land into dynamic queries, we are going to start defining some rules in here on how a user becomes a member of this group, because we're currently looking at a user query. Again, let's have a quick look through some of these details. As part of the setup, one of the first things that I'm looking to define here is properties. Now, properties are typically the details that I mentioned earlier when we were creating a user account, all the details that you can complete around a user, which I did say can get very, very useful or become very useful as you complete different parts of your setup. This is one of those features where I can start looking at adding a property and bringing a user to be a member of a group based on some of the details. Now, let's assume we go in here and suggest department, and we define that if the department equals to, and here let's bring in IT and say if the department equals to IT. Let's have a look at how this rule is typically written in syntax. Now, that's the detail that I have on the bottom of the screen. So if I just quickly check that out one more time, it says user.department, which simply is referring to that this is the property of a user that we are defining. And as long as that is equal to, which is -EQ, and within speech quotes, we have IT. So this is defining that if this user has a department defined under the properties, which is IT, the user automatically becomes a member of this group. However, there are quite a few other things that we can do. We can add other expressions to this to make it as complex as we require for our needs. For instance, let's add another expression to it. Now, once I add a second expression to this rule, one thing that becomes important to understand is this: the choice of and or with these statements. Let's start with and to begin with. Now, if I use the and statement, let's create one and then I'll explain what happens collectively. Now, in this case, let's go and choose another option, and let's go and say if the company name is, let's change this to something else now. Let's say not equal to, so you get to see how that is written as well. If the company name is not equal to, and let's say Fabricam, and that's what I am working with, and I want to add that user to this group. So now let's see how this entire rule works for me altogether. Now, we've covered the first part, which was users department equals to IT, and make a user member of this group. Now we have another part of the statement, which is separated by an and. Now, the and typically works, if you want to understand this, as adding the two statements together. If you're aware of the logical gates and OR gates, you might be able to understand that. However, just to explain that very, very quickly, and would in this case work as adding both the statements together. So we're saying only if first and second statement collectively are true, so if you can add them together, then eventually the user becomes a member of the group that we are creating. So in this case, if the user has a department, that's IT, and the user's company name is not Fabricam, they become a member of this. I could have users in my environment that are part of IT. However, their company name could be Contoso, could be Fabricam, could be many of the details that I might be working within my environment. In this particular scenario, they're only added to this group if they are not from Fabricam and they are part of IT. If any one of the other statement isn't true, they don't become a member of that group. Now, let's add another expression to kind of conclude this part. And in this case, we're going to look at the OR statement. Now, when I do OR statement, let's complete the statement first and I'll explain the details. Let's do OR and say city. Again, if the details are completed in your user profile, like I said, it can be quite useful. So I'll say city equal to, and in this case, let's add London. And this is how my statement looks like currently. Now, so far we've spoke about how the first part of the statement looks like over here between the department and the company, and we spoke about how the AND comes into play by looking at adding both the statements together. Now the OR works slightly different. Now OR would simply suggest, hold on, everything that you've just described over here, just put that to a side for a minute and let's have a look at a new statement. Now regardless of what was just described before, if the user city equals to London, this user becomes a member of the group. So it says either this or whatever is behind or before OR is true, they become a member of this group. If that first statement wasn't true, but the second statement is true, they still become a member of this group. Or the other way around, if the second statement wasn't true and the first statement is true, they still become a member of this group. So again, it's important to understand that the OR statement simply brings a halt to say whatever was described before is a separate statement, that being true or not true, or the second statement that we've defined after the OR, that being true, not true, based on some of those answers, they will either become a member or they won't become a member of that group. So I'm hoping that makes sense. And simply is looking at collectively adding multiple options together. So if you want to see a few different properties put together for them to gain this membership, then you can add and if you're looking for kind of setting complete different rules, that if they have a certain feature or forget about that feature or property and have another property, in this case looking at their city, if they belong to London, regardless or if they are in regardless if they are in IT or if they're in Fabrica, doesn't matter, either of those situations, as long as they are in London, they are going to be added to this group. So I'll leave this as it is and I'll say okay to this, so you can see how we can create a rule. Now you can have many different expressions in here to add as many things as you like to create your groups. Again, you can play around with adding some of these details in here. However, one thing that's important to understand that Microsoft recommends that using too many ORs can make things a bit complex or complicated, because now you're adding complete new statements as you add OR within that. So just be careful on that as you use multiple ORs within your statements. Now I'll hit save to this, and again we'll see a new dynamic query that's been used for us to create a group assignment for this particular group that we are creating. Let's hit create, and finally we have our group created that we were looking at going through certain settings and details. All right, now as a group is getting ready for us to look at, let's have a look at all groups and see if our group is ready. Let's just check that in the information here. So it says IT support line 2 is ready. So let's have a quick check. Let's do IT, and I can see IT support line 2 is ready. So if I go into that group for now, let's hide this away and have a quick look. It tells me this is a dynamic group. That means I can't add members to this group manually. However, I can still see the members option under the groups tab. So if I click on that and look into the details, I have options to add members. Well, let's try. Let's go and try and say, let's make Adele a member of this group. As soon as I do that, it gives me an error message suggesting I don't have sufficient privileges to do that. In fact, I do have the right roles assigned to my account currently. However, that is a feature that's not currently allowed because this is a dynamic group, and the only membership type that we should see over here is user that has the right settings that are defined within that role. Right, now let's scroll down. Now if I go into adding a licenses here, again, currently it suggests adding and removing licenses are no longer supported in this part of the portal, and we need to go into doing this from the M365 admin portal, which I showed you as part of user licenses. However, before I jump back onto that to show you some of this, one thing that we need to understand is if I go to the property of this group and scroll down, we did not enable roles onto this, so that's something to bear in mind. Now, let's come back to this. Let's go into licenses for this group and have a look at groups. And by the way, I have just jumped into the admin.microsoft.com portal that we were looking at earlier on when we were assigning licenses to my user. So just continuing from that same menu. So if I look at assigning licenses now to my groups rather than just the users, let's have a quick look at that. So if I go down, I don't have a group with a license currently available, but let's go and assign one. So if I go into details here, look at some of my groups, I have IT support line 2, and I can simply do the same process that we did for the user, switch on, switch off certain features if I don't want them to be able to use this under that group, and I can simply go and hit assign, and I should be able to assign that to that group. Now, one thing that's important to understand is this, that you must ensure that you have sufficient number of licenses available when you're assigning them to a group, otherwise you'll get an error message, a bit like the one I have on the screen. Again, I'll leave this out for now, otherwise typically you'll simply hit on assign right now and you can assign a license to that group as well. As we conclude this module on Microsoft Entra ID, let's recap on the key points that we've covered. We've explored the creation, configuration, and management of identities and delved into managing users and groups within Microsoft Entra ID. Remember to review knowledge questions and additional study material on Microsoft Learn using aka.ms/learn to reinforce your understanding. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you found this module informative and engaging. See you in the next session.